never worry about, well, in most cases like this, I never worry about paint getting onto other areas because it's all fixable, right? Like, and you want other colors now and again to bleed into other colors anyway, because you learn a lot that way. You learn what a color does and how it reacts. Like this will look really good. See there's some on the sand there? I'm okay with that for now because the sand's going to get painted anyway with probably earth and some umbers and washes and now I'll just give you a pan and I'll show you some of the variations that I start to apply. Like over here on the right, you can see this, it's almost a red kind of brown. And I did this feathering here, the soft edge with the airbrush, but you can do this with lots of water and just dabbing in paint straight from the bottle and letting the water thin as it runs. But I just had some in the airbrush, you know, and I just happened to have it on the go. I have an airbrush plugged in all the time with my compressor turned off, and I can just grab my airbrush anytime I want. Whenever I feel like it, okay? And some of this rock was airbrushed with a bit of light gray. It's always minimal amounts. One of the big mistakes that a lot of people make when they venture into this is the paint's too thick. Almost every time I've seen it over and over again, and when I've taught in the past, I have to force people to thin their paint, like take their paint out of their hand practically and do it myself. Okay, you got to thin it down, especially with an airbrush. Like an airbrush will lay pigment evenly dispersed through atomization. Okay, better than a traditional brush will. Okay, so I use traditional brush and airbrush for all my scenery work. This is early stages, right? Can you guess how many layers are there already? Including, you know, strata, soil, foam, matte mediums built in, right? Layers of colors, right? There's no paint on here yet. I mean, some cases you don't even have to paint that. You can let that show through, but like I'm going to have grass, static grass growing up here, and I'll probably leave this because this is a good base color to see through. But, you know, so just before I move on, try to understand how light and shadow works. Like here's the light above. I'll turn it off. See what happens? Changes everything, right? So I have a default light sensor on my camera, so I'm not doing anything with that. That's just light. So we want to create that artificially when we paint. We want to overemphasize shadow and overemphasize light, because once it's on the model, no matter what kind of light we put on it, it takes on a very realistic look, right? Like there would be dark, this washes, I would spray this wet with water and then stab with a brush straight from the bottle, thinned, mind you, right into that. Even if it's thick, because when you spray water on it, right, you can control it. You go, no, I want more, and then let it start to run down. Just think of the rain washing it all away. That's what I do. And add paint, lots of water, wet on wet, like you'll hear that term throughout the series, wet on wet, okay? So you can see now that what I've done, right? I've just used a couple of colors here, okay? That dark and the brown on the left and then a little bit of red brown. Red brown will go a long way, so you don't want to use too much of that. I just want to suggest maybe a little bit of a rust mark there from some erosion. But that can be covered up later too if you don't like. You can even tone that down with an airbrush. But see how the dark with the water runs into all the little crevices? So you just created a shadow effect there. See how it's hugged the shoreline on the left here? Right. So that's hilarious. See what it's done here on the rock here. And like I say, if you stay with it and you don't like it, just give it a squirt of water. See how it's running now into that other little channel there? Now when that dries, I mean, like here where it's dark, like you could come along there later with a bit of matte medium and sprinkle a little bit of ground foam on there, like moss growing up. Like let's just say the sun comes across, but it doesn't, it's always in the shade here maybe, right? You know what I mean? This is what I mean, like the postage stamp scene. Focus in on one little scene, and you know, it helps to go for a walk too and check out shorelines or rivers. You know, put it into your memory. The mind is a powerful tool, you know, and it comes out when we get into this kind of a okay, so what I'll do is I'll just apply a little bit more here again. So I want to wet it down. And you can see how the color here, see how it's changing? Like it was very dark, right? Like, let me show you again here. And also too, let me say, like, don't be afraid to dip water. Like I just dipped my brush into water. Just straight water. Like, or isopropyl, back and forth, it doesn't matter. Isopropyl is completely 100% compatible with water. And to me, a paint is compatible with water and isopropyl. Do you see why I use it so much? Because it's very forgiving that way. And that's why I love it for scenery paint. And if it's thinned all the time, like someone say, oh, it's expensive. Well, if you thin it like this and you just use washes, you turn your paints into pin washes, it'll go a long ways. Trust me, it'll go a long ways. You could even do a base coat of just cheaper craft paint, like a foundational coat, if you want it as well, and then touch up with Tamiya, if you'd like. Just give it a bit of water, see what it does. See there? See how it runs down? You can see some of the effects that I've already did some dry brushing last night, but I can still go over that once it's dry, right? Like if you use water, it won't reactivate the underlying colors if it's Tamiya. If you just use water, if you use isopropyl, it has the potential to do so, but it usually won't. And even if it does, maybe you want that. But if you build up in layers, like let each layer dry. If you try to put all the layers on at once, you're going to end up with mud. That's an artist's worst nightmare. It's where everything turns into just one kind of color. So if that happens at first, that's okay. Don't worry about it, right? Because that happens to everyone. It happens to me once in a while, not as much because of the experience and the method that I do, like allow it to dry. Just put a fan on. If you put a fan on your work, like I turn a fan on here, it dries it incredibly fast, and then you can go at it again with water. Okay, so see it's just tinted water to me. I can wash my brush out with water, or if I really want to clean it, I use isopropyl. But I have water and this always on hand. Okay, and then I just spray, add water, and I just have fun, but just keep it wet. As long as you want to work with it, just keep it wet. If you keep acrylic paint wet like this, and when that dries, that's going to change, and you're going to love it. Because the way it dries and it just retracts back and tones down, it just starts to come alive that way. And this hasn't even had foliage, right? Like there's no grass. Like imagine when you start to do that. And then you can put a thin earth wash over top of the grass, and it'll leave it green, but it'll go down into the roots and tie it all in with continuity of color, you see. Okay? And then I'll show you what happens when I put a bit of brown, in this case this color here, which is a derivative of earth and black, onto the soil with water. See the water? Oops, look, some ran down. Good. That's a mistake, right? Oops. But that's part of it. That's part of the process. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to see what that looks like. I don't worry about this distinction here to here. Why? Because when that dries and I put grass, might put more soil there. You just live with the piece. Live with the stamp. Live with the scene for a while. And then move to the left or the right and just move along. Go back and revisit it, things like that, okay? Okay, so just want to talk about some of the layers or how I apply them, like in a case like this where you got a lot going on. So let's just summarize quick then. So this is 1/4 inch plywood, right? This surface, and then I used coarse molding paste to build up a little bit of this delta here. I also applied some of the oxide sand that I had mentioned earlier, just to give it a little bit of a sandy texture. Just playing around with different mediums. Like they don't always show right now what they will when you paint and put washes on it. They'll really pop. And that's the point of putting multiple layers and textures. So when I do the big rocks, like a lot of times I'll use just some straight heavy matte medium or even carpenter's glue to glue the big stuff, because you won't see it anyway, just so that they anchor in place. So when you put in the mid size and smaller size, they hang up a bit, you can build it up. And this is the advantage, of just wetting down like water and isopropyl. I use like 90% water, 10% isopropyl, or 95 to 5%, somewhere around there, just as the isopropyl penetrates nicely. And then when you chase it with diluted matte medium at 50-50 or so, it soaks in really good. Okay, so yeah, so then I'll just set it up dry and play around with a brush, and then build up a heavy layer of rock first and then seal that in place. I know it seems maybe more time consuming than people would like, but I don't care about that, because that's what it takes to get a really nice realistic looking scenery cross section like this, for example. So now I'm kind of, what I'm doing here is I came in and I put this smaller gravel down here, like erosion runoff, like down here in the corner. If you go back an episode or two, you see how that was just a clean corner there. Do the same application, soak matte medium. And now I've taken some soil, once again sifted soil with an old flour sifter. I like to have 3 or 4, even 5 grades of soil, different coarseness and so on. And in this case, I'm just sprinkling a little bit on the top of these sort of rock face pieces here. It helps if it's dry, because then you can move it around. Because if you sprinkle it all on when everything's wet, then everything will cover. Like you don't want the really light sand over all of your rock work. Because when you paint it or when it dries, like that's what it looks like. It looks like you just went over it with a salt and pepper shaker, right? Like you want distinction. Like when you're in scale like this, especially in HO or O, it really shows. Like, so you want to create, a natural sort of, erosion or flow of soils and so on. And that's the beauty of matte medium and with the soaking method, for those of you that are just wondering, because you can lay everything on dry, and if you don't like it, you can just keep moving it around and composing it and so on, and then just give it a like a light mist like so, and then come in with just a drop or two from the top in this case, because it'll seep down. And like I say, this matte medium dries flat clear, right? Like you won't see it, and it puts a nice protective coating that won't yellow with age as well. So that's what I do. So I would say there's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with this paint layer, 6 layers, and then the celluclay here. That's the pink foam, right? And then the plastic model and the rock. So layer after layer after layer, and then you decide when you want to stop, right? Like when, you know, when it feels right or when it clicks, then you can walk away. But, you know, there'll probably be later on some static grass and shrubbery and stuff like put in here as well. But that's the key to get the scene that really pops, is to treat each section, you know, that postage stamp principle that I talked about earlier. Like, just try not to cover your whole layout, like in this case, like all in one big go, you know. I mean, you can do that if you like, but if you want to create, you know, intimate vignettes and scenes that multiply themselves throughout your layout and make for a really compelling story and visual attraction that supports all your trains, you know, then this is the method that I use, and I really love this part, you know, just layer after layer after layer, and then it begins to come alive, right? Okay.